Good afternoon and welcome to this first Risk and Assurance Committee meeting of this triennium. Before we kick off the meeting, I'm hoping that as a table we can do a karakia together. The wording is in front of you, so let's kick off. Thank you, members, for that. I'm sure we'll get better as we go along with a bit of practice. So welcome to today's meeting. I'd like to acknowledge all the elected members around the table, CEO Monique and her management team, and obviously our wonderful staff and subject matter experts. A special welcome to our newly appointed independent members. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look very much forward to you receiving your wisdom and guidance. I'd also like to acknowledge anybody who's watching the live stream. I'm sure it's the highlight of your day. Before we get started, I thought I'd just take a moment to acknowledge those of our fellow New Zealanders around the country who are doing it very tough after a series of weather events, not the least Cyclone Gabrielle. And I wanted to send a message on behalf of this group, a message of support to our fellow elected members around the country and obviously council staff who are right in the mix of, in the thick of helping their communities respond and recover. And I think it emphasises that local government really does matter and it makes a real difference, especially in times like this. And I'm sure that members around the table will also join me in sending our best wishes to all of those communities as they recover, but with a special mention for the Tararua district, which Horowhenua District Council has adopted as part of a scheme where we will look to provide ongoing support, such as providing people and other resources to help that council through their recovery. Now turning to procedural matters, we've got a full committee table, which is great, so no apologies. We have no public participation, as I understand it. Just confirm that. We have no late items, and I'd now like to invite any members, if they have any interests they'd like to declare. None? Excellent. I don't believe we have any minutes to confirm today. That's excellent. So that was probably very plain sailing and smooth for our first procedural matters. For anyone who is watching the live stream, I'd just like to take a moment to first introduce the members of the committee. So we have Mayor Burney. My name is Sam Jennings, chair of this committee. We have Councillor Paul Olsen, Deputy Chair of the committee. Councillors Alan Young, Clint Grimstone and Jonathan Proctor. And then we have our two independent members, Jenny Lifshitz and Sarah Everton, who is joining us by Zoom. Thank you, Sarah. And I want to especially acknowledge our two independent members. We're very excited to have you on board, and we've shown that excitement by sending you, I think it was over 800 pages of information to get you started. So again, we acknowledge and thank you for your journey and sort of getting up to speed and obviously coming on this journey for us. And so thank you for your efforts and contributions so far. Today, to keep me in line, I have Jacinta Straker, Group Manager Organisational Performance, and Jacinta's role covers a number of the key areas within the scope of this committee, including risk, procurement, finance, and other aspects. So as a new chair, I just wanted to flag that having not chaired a council meeting before, I do have my training wheels on. So you may have to accept some hiccups along the way today. And the Mayor has promised only to jump in with a point of order if I really get off script too far. And look, I've also indicated to CEO Monique and Jacinta that they are welcome to press their button a little more freely than they might otherwise, just to ensure that we stay on track, or if there's any particular things they want to raise to ensure that we get the most out of today's meeting. And so just again, as part of the introduction to this committee, I thought I might, before we get into the substance, just take the time to reflect on the purpose and value of this committee, and that's to help us make sure we are focused and that we are adding value. So, just reflecting on the terms of reference, the purpose of this committee is to contribute to improving the governance, performance and accountability of the council, and we're going to do that by ensuring we have appropriate financial, health and safety, risk management and internal control systems in place. We'll also do that by seeking reasonable assurance as to the integrity and reliability of the council's financial and non-financial reporting. We'll also do that by providing a communications link between management, the council, and external and internal auditors, and ensuring their independence and adequacy. And finally, by promoting a culture of openness and continuous improvement. And we obviously have detailed terms of reference that clearly defines our areas of focus and our delegations. And so this committee, I think, is important to reflect that it does have a renewed focus and different terms of reference from the previous term, or from last term. And that's the main thing there is that we've removed finance from the core focus of the committee. And so what I wanted to do now is just invite Mayor Burney, who determined the scope and structure of the committee, perhaps just to offer any your views on, or explain why we've taken the approach that we have to the focus of this committee.
Thanks, Sam. And look, there's no magic bullet here. It's really, as you say, it's about being on the journey for the continuous improvement space. We know that we have to do things a little differently nowadays, where risk and is a major part, health and safety is a major part. So removing the financial part from this committee was very much a focus on ensuring that we concentrate on things that we know can make a difference in terms of the way we operate. So look, I don't want to add anything more. I know we're in capable hands, and look forward to the journey that we go on.
Thank you, Mayor Burney. And look, I think it is important to pick up on that point about that continuous improvement journey, and so to acknowledge where we've come from. We've come from a long list with a number of gaps and areas of where we've identified that improvement is required. And I think that with Monique's appointment in 2020 and the senior management team taking shape, that's involved a huge amount of an active work to address a number of issues and strengthen our internal systems. And huge progress has been made, particularly in the procurement and risk space. And we have a team of really dedicated subject matter experts that are focused on driving those particular areas forward. And obviously, there's also been significant progress that Jacinta has led in terms of tackling a pretty long list of long-standing audit findings and recommendations. And I'm sure that Jacinta will be able to talk to us about that later in the meeting. And I guess while Council is making good progress, this committee has a key role in monitoring our efforts and ensuring that we are continuing to focus on the things that matter. Jacinta or Monique, did you have any comments that you wanted to make at this point? Okay. Finally, sorry, I'll stop going on, but as I said earlier, I really want this committee to add value, so I ask you to actively contribute and express your expectations around reporting and the information you need to hear and see to be assured. So please be curious, ask questions, challenge Jacinta and her team, and we of course invite different views and ideas. And my focus is on facilitating that really constructive feedback that adds value. So let's get into the agenda. So just to remind people that independent member Sarah is joining us by Zoom. So if you could ensure that when you speak that you press the button on your microphones and speak clearly and closely into the microphone. On a number of the agenda items, I have received some questions from elected members who aren't part of this committee, namely Councillor Tukapua, and look, rather than try to summarise those questions, what I'm proposing to do is, at the relevant agenda item, I'll invite Councillor Tukapua to come to the table so that she can ask those questions directly of staff. I think that's probably a better use of the time. So our first report is 6.1, the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Quarterly Report, March 2023. And I'll start us off by moving 2.1 and 2.2. This should be up on the screen, but they read that report 2394 Health and Safety and Wellbeing Quarterly Report, March 2023 be received, and 2.2 that this matter or decision be recognised is not significant in terms of Section 76 of the Local Government Act. Could I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Young. All in favour? Any against? No. So what I'd like to do now is invite health and... Oh, you're already there. you beat me to it. So look, I'd like to thank Ashley and Tanya for joining us. And if you could introduce the report and answer any questions.
Good afternoon, Chair and Councillors. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Tanya Glavis and I'm the Health and Safety Lead here at Horowhenua District Council. Since the previous triennium, work has gone into providing a more detailed report, and this meeting has got the inclusion of a dashboard report, which is based on the Safe Plus framework format of leadership, risk management and worker engagement. And this is for the lead and lag reporting, and along with that is 12-month trends, which you can see in the report. As part of the MWLAS, Horowhenua District Council complete a full Safe Plus assessment every 2 years. And we also have included in this report an example of a hazard, and that is identified as the Foxton trolley bus system, and how under the Health and Safety at Work Act we are managing that. And alongside that is an update of the Komiti Oranga, which is our Health and Safety Committee. And at the end of the report we've got attached this quarter is the Charter, which is coming to its end date, and we are working on a framework and action plan that will supersede that Charter come June, July this year. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Tanya. What I might do is actually, just invite Councillor Tukapua up to the table, because she did have a question on this matter. So if you'd like to join us at the table, Councillor Tukapua. And just while Councillor Tukapua is making her way up, I thought I might just start with a question where obviously this committee is receiving reporting around health and safety and well-being, but could you just explain to us how the full council is going to be kept up to date, and how reporting will flow through to the full council? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the 6-weekly OPR report has a health and safety section in there. So this goes to the full council, and questions or information required from there would be available to be answered, and this Risk and Assurance Committee will be informed with a more full report every quarter.
Thank you very much. And sorry.
Just to add on to that, of course, if there was anything critical or urgent that did arise that needed to be brought to elected members, that would go through a CEO and would be brought to elected members straight away. So if there is anything critical, that would happen instantly and not wait for a report.
Thank you very much for that. And so I think, just in summary, essentially what we're saying is that while this committee has a more detailed focus and will receive some more detailed reporting, that because the full council, as a PCBU, has those obligations under legislation, that and needs to be active in terms of monitoring and understanding our risks and obligations in that space, that there will continue to be that line of sight for the full membership of council and an expectation that they are contributing to those discussions and that monitoring. Councillor Tukapua, did you want to start off with your question?
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. It's a similar question, really, but goes just a little bit further in terms of the work plan or schedule on page 65. I know this is a bit beyond. Talks about training for elected members, and that in the next financial year, 23-24, phase 1 of that will roll out, and then 2025, phase 2. But within your report on page 23, where there's this vision statement that says elected members subscribe to the principle that, and then second, elected members acknowledge their responsibility and take reasonable steps to understand council's operations and health and safety risks. And then there's more to that. I guess I'm asking this committee, how will you ensure that elected members collectively own this?
Thank you very much for that question, and I might put that back to staff and with a question sitting over the top of it, which is, how do you envisage that charter being progressed and reviewed, and how are we likely to include or provide the opportunity for members who aren't part of this committee, elected members who may wish to contribute and feed into that?
So just referencing back to this charter and the framework and action plan that is currently in progress, the update around the leadership and elected member contribution or assurance in that new framework will be a workshop that we'll have with you to ensure that the level of information that you want to receive to ensure your due diligence and obligations under health and safety will come through into the new action plan. In regards to this charter and the information that's included there, below is a monitoring report where we outline how we're going to achieve certain objectives and actions, and some of those cross-reference back to doing the due diligence to show elected members. So a way of that monitoring is we update this and bring this back to you to show how we've done this operationally or from a governance point of view to meet the above bullet points. I would also say that in previous reporting we have shown that through there. However, we can always improve, and I think there's a lot more we can do in that space. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Councillor Tukapua, did you have any follow-up to that you wanted to ask? Are you comfortable with that? Or actually, perhaps I'll just phrase the question a bit, which is, so the workshops that you describe, that they are to be with the full council rather than just this committee?
Yes, definitely. So that'll be with the full council.
Sorry, Councillor Grimstone, I'll just check with Councillor Tukapua. Did you have any further follow-up? Okay. Councillor Grimstone.
Tanya, can you perhaps share a little bit about the site health and safety visits and the opportunity for elected members and leadership team to participate in those? Because I think in terms of what we've just spoken about, that's a tangible proposal that you've...
Yes, part of the work plan is to invite members, elected members, to site visits to give a live experience of what may be happening in health and safety on those spaces, the work around where we will go and how that will be managed is ongoing at this moment to finalise on the work plan, but things like induction, how risk is mitigated within the work site, the pre-work we do to ensure that contractors are pre-qualified so we know they have their companies are approaching health and safety in the appropriate way with appropriate training and qualifications. And then once we're at sites, then you see that in action with the way you're inducted and the way that the site is managed from a health and safety perspective.
Any further questions?
Thank you, Chair. Tanya, you talk about the dashboard and the index and the benchmarking. Indications are that we seem to be in a reasonably good space in terms of comparing ourselves against others. But where does the journey take us? Where would you like us to be in 12 months' time in terms of that index?
Through the Chair, thank you, Mayor Burney, for the question. Through the Safe Plus assessment assessment that we do with NWLAS, we have moved from developing to performing at this point, and that was a 2-year journey. Later this year, considering that it will be confirmed with NWLAS, we will have another full assessment, and we hope to get to the leading position there. So that is where what we have at the moment is very good. In comparison, we're doing very well and we are performing, but to get to that leading, we need to ensure that it's a journey that we are all on. Leadership, managing our risks, ensuring that that's part of the BAU that staff are working through, and then that worker engagement, so our workers view health and safety as a whole. It's not just a separate part that might be looked at, that we are working towards a really holistic, high-performing leadership space, and that will be shown through the Safe Plus assessment.
Just to jump in here as well, I love that you asked that question, Mayor Burney. It is an area that excites me, especially that continuous improvement, and I'm so happy that you asked it. In 12 months from now, where we also want to be is we want to have won an award for the work that we're doing. So we are currently going through this framework and action plan to get to leading. I want us to get to leading, and in our next assessment we may not quite be there, but within a couple of years and the action plan that's being developed at the moment, that's where we will be, with a lot of work, hard work and dedication, but we are taking this piece of work and we want to win an award for it.
Thank you. Member Jenny.
Just a brief question. Congratulations on the work that you're doing. It looks really good framework, and you're making really good progress. Just a bit of a question around the training. I see the stats are showing really low numbers of training. It's on page 20 for the current year, and I just want to check in. You've got some really big goals there, and in terms of the outlook in achieving your training plans for the year, how's it looking in that?
Through the Chair, thank you for your question. Yes, we did do a really big push last year, and we had some very big full council attendance or 100 people attendance at training, which did spike our last year's training. We have still got a few months of training to come through on the current year. It's quite focused on teams, which sometimes does show up in smaller numbers, but not in the opportunities for the teams to have that or the type of training they require or need. I can give you a breakdown if that would assist to show you the types of training, but I think the numbers are smaller, but it's been a more concentrated type of training being delivered to our staff.
So every year we pre-plan for the following year our training within health, safety and wellbeing. Last year we had a massive focus on mental health and wellbeing, so we did mental health training for managers, and then we rolled it out to all staff for Mental Health 101. So that was a really big push. This year we are looking in different areas, so we're kind of doing some driver safety training. We always keep up our first aid trainings and things like that, but it's a more concentrated look on certain areas where we are capturing potentially less number of people, but it's really dedicated training to those areas that require it. Alongside that, we continue to do our on-site training as well. So there's which is, I guess we're not all sitting in a room, but in our staff meetings it is always mentioned health and safety. We remind about reporting. Team meetings, it's always brought up. So there's a lot of different areas outside of formal training where we're ensuring that staff are continually upskilled.
Just checking, member Sarah, did you have any questions?
Probably just the one, and it's similar to the training. I know how arduous it can be to complete health and safety assessments when there's been a particular incident. But as part of the training, I guess I just want to ask whether or not the staff and anybody that's working in the libraries and the pool, etc., understand that the responsibilities that they all have to actually report this, and more importantly, how important it is so that we can learn from it. Because I think sometimes people are a bit nervous about doing it in case they're seen as doing something wrong. So I guess it's whether or not that is built into the training as well.
Yes, that is definitely built into the training. And I must say, with the new facilities manager coming on board, he noted that our aquatics do exemplar reporting in many of the different councils that he has worked in. He said that actually ours is outstanding in terms of the reporting for aquatics. We do get really, really good reporting within the library space as well. As part of the training that Tanya delivers to managers around how to review a report, how do we assess and how do we put additional controls in place, we also roll out training to staff around what is a near miss, how do you report. Yeah. Everyone has a login so they can all report. So that is covered across the board in all of our sites.
Thanks.
Any final questions from any member?
I had emailed a couple of questions, and they're sort of pertinent to these slides. So slide 20 of your agenda. So I just had a query regarding the E-road reporting. So yeah, I'm making an assumption here that this is E-road reporting versus ticketing for over speed limits. And I note that there's been a significant reduction over several months. So my first question is, have there been interventions that has led to that downward trajectory? And my follow-up question is really around what tolerance levels do we at a council table have around what that should look like, and then what are the consequence process look like for staff members in the event that they appear over the speed limit?
Through the chair, thank you for your questions. So the E-roads pick up satellite overspeed at different sections of 10 kilometres, 15 kilometres and 20 kilometres over the speed limit. We do take it very seriously, and it is reported on monthly to the ELT. So the example that we've given here in January, where there were 44 occurrences of overspeed in total, there are clusters of 2 to 4 seconds, so that's say 4 reports come through, or longer, but most of them were 1 second, so quite literally a 1 second ping to get to below where they're meant to be. it's not acceptable, and it is part of the message that goes out regularly, and part of the reasoning our reporting has been coming down in numbers is because I've been working very closely with teams that do a lot of time on the road, and working with them to ensure they use the 200 metre slowing down before the speed sign changes, increase or decrease, to use that time to ensure they stay and move themselves into the appropriate speed. So tolerance, I have very low tolerance. As an organisation, we have very low tolerance. We work closely with our teams to ensure they are safe, they are keeping our communities safe, and their behaviour on the road is appropriate to our council.
Where it gets to a point where we need to do something further about it, that is then referred on to a manager. So Tanya and myself don't deal with the follow-on effect of that.
And through the chair, probably would just provide some assurance to the committee that our disciplinary policy provides appropriate process should we need that process.
And just to acknowledge that I know that the system does work because we had a naughty councillor in the previous term that got, using a council vehicle that got picked up through this very system. So he shall remain nameless. But thank you. Are there any further questions from any member? Oh, Councillor Grimstone.
Sorry. So, two other points. HDC Aquatics, the accident for other persons is trending upwards. Also, probably on a similar train, the near miss for recreational services has spiked quite a bit. So I'm interested to understand, are there some commonalities involved in the increased reporting, and have there been some controls that have been looked at and put in place around those trends?
Thank you for your question. We have an expert in aquatics sitting behind you, so I'm going to pass the aquatics question over to Group Manager Brent.
Thank you, Ashley, and through you, Mr. Chair. The aquatics incidents trending up are probably in relation to the school holiday period. So obviously the visitation through our sites is a lot higher over that time. Aquatics report everything from a scrape from somebody going up the Hyder slide to a bump or more significant incidents. So that's as part of the process for us. Everything gets reported. But the increase, I would put it down to the increase in people through the doors.
Excellent. So if there's no... sorry, Mayor Bernie.
Well, that's just prompted a thought in terms of our relationship with our contractors and our, we have Higgins and Rec Services and Downers. We obviously report the incidents or accidents from those contractors, but we don't have any responsibility for the contractors we employ to do capital projects or anything like that outside those, do we? I just wondered, why do we have to worry about our contractors like those and not the others? Is that a silly question?
Definitely not a silly question. I see Dan's urging to answer this one.
Yeah, we're responsible for all. It's just in terms of the health and safety systems that are in place that the contractor will manage, and there's only certain incidents that would be escalated, and those are along. There's a framework around that we don't hear about every on a regular basis into our system, but we get notified through separate means, and reporting into specific projects and risk assessments around that. Yep. So ultimately, we're responsible. Yeah, and we've got systems in place to manage.
To add to that, we report on Rec Services, Higgins and Downer in this report, as we have a strong relationship with them. They are our main contractors. We have contract meetings with them where these reports are discussed, and Tanya and myself attend the health and safety meeting with Alliance. Tanya has regular contact with Higgins, low cost bins, and rec services as well, so that connection from our health and safety and their team is growing stronger and stronger by the day. What we're aiming to get more in this report is around low cost bins, because we also have a strong relationship with them, and they hold quite a bit of risk as well in the work that they do. So over time we look to include them in the report as well. So we don't necessarily, they're our contractors, and we sign a contract with them, and when they sign that contract and we sign it, we ensure that their health and safety practices are up to date, and they have some KPIs around ensuring that they report that back to us.
Thank you very much. Unless there's any further questions from any member.
Sorry, I've got one. Sorry to
Thank you, Sarah. No, excellent.
Hi. Just a couple of things from a more proactive perspective, and I just don't know whether it's done here, but I just wonder whether or not you do any or have any qualified first aiders that are on the ground within the organisation. That was something that I have seen in past health and safety reporting, and also fire wardens. And I know that that depends on the number of people on a floor or in a building and the number of fire exits there are, that sort of thing, just to make sure that we're sort of up with a play on that. It may not be something that we are required to do here, but I have seen it in previous reporting.
Thank you, Member Sarah. We certainly do throughout all of our sites. Some sites we require that there is a certain number of first aiders. Every lifeguard is first aid trained. We ensure our sites where, for instance, animal control, they need to all be first aid trained. We have roughly 15 sitting within this building to ensure that we always have a coverage if something is to happen, and also in our library and aquatic services as well. In terms of fire wardens, we provide fire warden training on a yearly basis. If the person leaves, we then rerun the training. There is a number of fire wardens allocated to each department and area that we are located within each building to ensure there's always a coverage. Those set people are trained, but we ensure that everyone in the business is aware of the evacuation routes and can put on that pink vest. So we can, so we do have that. But thank you. I think that's probably something that we can add to this report to ensure that it shows you that we have that number at a reasonable level.
Yeah, thank you.
Any further questions, Member Sarah? Excellent. Well, look, thank you, members, for your very thoughtful questions, and obviously staff for the very informative answers. And I'd just like to acknowledge the high quality of the report and materials provided to us. We've obviously seen a huge amount of work over the years, so thank you very much for all the work that you've done, and really loving the dashboard. So thank you very much. What we'll do now is move to item 6.2, which is Risk Management Status Quarterly Report March 2023. And I'm pretty excited by this report because this was, I guess, risk was probably not a strength area of the previous iteration of this committee. So this will be great to understand this critical area and enable Council to better use risk as a tool. So I'll start off by moving 2.1 and 2.2. So that is that the report 2395 Risk Management Status Quarterly Report March 2023 be received, and 2.2 that this matter or decision be recognised as not significant in terms of Section 76 of the Local Government Act 2002. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Olsen. All in favour? Any against? Excellent. Now we're joined at the table with Business Performance Manager Ashley and Risk Manager Rob. If you could introduce the report and answer any questions.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, councillors and independent members. So, is that going all right? Cool. I guess just to start off really from a risk management perspective, and I'm sure everyone fully appreciates that risk management is owned and governed by everyone within the organisation. So as I move through what is very much a new journey for council and Horowhenua District Council and staff, in its infancy, everything here pretty much on the table is new in respect to in the direction we're moving. So the purpose of this paper is to report the Risk Insurance Committee, the risk landscape, the risk management work in progress, and to ignite discussion with the committee about risk. Keeping in mind that we have a newly formed Council Risk and Insurance Committee executive leadership team and obviously the appointment of my role, timing is perfect for us to begin a new journey in the review, completely overhaul and refocus our organisation's approach to managing risk within the business. It's fair to say after a relatively short period within the Council and undertaking the All of Government risk maturity assessment, that risk within the organisation currently is used from a discussional language perspective all the time. There's very few meetings or discussions I have with individuals where the word risk doesn't come up. So it already has a really high level profile. Just the capturing and the reporting and the ongoing mitigation and treatment is probably a little bit immature. So there's a fair amount of this journey that needs to take place. The report will continue to keep all audience abreast and include abreast of and include in that journey. Risk management unharnessed can become very complex to navigate, and from experience I have purposely kept the strategy and framework simplistic in allowing our entire audience to buy into the risk management journey as well as contributing to that journey. It would be extremely easy for me to provide a strategy and framework that was fit for purpose probably for elected members and senior members, elected members and the executive, however, lose the audience amongst other teams and within the community should we make it too complex. The risk framework you have in front of you is the value of underpinning the risk management framework document is one of working together as a team. Our objective is for the HDC to adopt the same language when discussing risk, transparent communication when it comes to identifying and assessing and managing risk across council. And that's something I think from an awareness perspective is probably one of the most important parts of that journey as we start. The framework is combining a suite of tools and processes by which we manage risk. This is an effective system to guide and support the integration of risk management processes and practices across the council. Risk strategy and work plan. In short, our strategy focuses on three key aspects: raising awareness, establishing a risk framework that improves our communication and reporting of risk. The initial work plan supports our framework as a vehicle to how we will achieve this. It's also important to understand that this is a moving feast, so to speak, in respect to our journey as a council and organisation, and we look forward to any feedback and contribution that everybody has within the organisation.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Rob. I think it's fair to say that obviously while risk is a key focus of this committee, that all the work you're doing is about really building that collective ownership of risk across the business and at the full council level as well. And there'll be a number of opportunities to use risk through a number of other council processes, and particularly around the long-term plan and those kind of processes. Look, I just wanted to acknowledge that a number of members have submitted questions prior to the meeting, and there's been some responses provided to some of those, and so invite members now to ask their questions. But if you have submitted a written question and you wanted to repeat that and provide staff with the opportunity to confirm that the written answer that you've been provided, that's you're more than welcome to do that as well. So I'll open the floor to questions. Member Jenny.
Thank you. I've got a couple of detailed questions, but probably more broadly. You've spoken about going on a journey, and it looks like there's really good progress being achieved in these initial documents. In the work program over the next few meetings, we've got I see there's risk maturity information and risk appetite assessment and so on. And I'm just wondering whether today's resolution is basically requesting the committee to endorse these documents now, and I'm just wondering whether it should actually be at a later date once these have had a little bit more work in terms of that risk maturity assessment and appetite statements and so on, whether that maybe they just need a bit more forming and polishing, and that work around particularly the risk appetite statement will help inform that risk framework and make sure that it's a bit more polished before it goes through to council for formal adoption. Interested in thoughts on that, please.
I guess possibly putting that back to the committee, that's a decision that comes through where you sit with the whole framework and the strategy. However, moving forward, it's important that we do have a document that provides and oversees that direction. And so that is important. The reason that we haven't hooked into the appetite so early is the fact that we have a newly formed council, and they need to establish over time what that appetite may look like. So I think that can be adopted into the document at any time, and we can change that through an amendment. However, I think from a journey perspective, we need some groundwork or foundation documentation that allows us to move forward.
Thank you, Member Jenny. I think the gist of some of the questions that have come through prior to the meeting suggest that there may need to be some refinement or some further amendments to the framework. And so, I'll invite a discussion perhaps after some further questions around whether we might be happy to endorse the documents in principle, acknowledging that there will be some further refinement and further work, or whether we do want to take some further time to get it right. I think there's probably a sweet spot there, but I'll invite that discussion further on. I'll just invite further member questions. Did you have any further questions?
A few questions around that.
Councillor Tukupu, are you happy if I ask Member Jenny to run through her list, and then we'll come back to yours?
I've got a question on page 39, just around the roles and responsibilities. I'm just trying to understand, this is a new committee, and trying to understand what risk reporting is actually going to be coming through to this committee. The document talks about high-level risks being reported here. In the risk manager role, it talks about high and extreme risk being reported, and later on in the document, when there's the different risk assessment levels, it talks about catastrophic risks and major risks, and it was a bit unclear to me actually what the expectations are in terms of the reporting through to the Risk and Assurance Committee. So I'm interested in officer comment on that, and if there's maybe a way of being a bit clearer around that, because we really do want to set the framework well so that we understand what's in and out of scope for this committee. Thank you.
I agree in respect to the fact that we could make that clearer, and from a Risk and Assurance Committee perspective, we will always report the top 10 risks. I think in this occasion we've reported all, just to give everybody an understanding of what we have brought to date. Obviously this early on again in the journey, and I don't want to use that frame too much. However, there's a lot more to add and change and update from that perspective. Also understanding from a risk perspective, it is managed in real time as well. So any risks that are brought to light at a very high level, and generally from a significant or extreme perspective, are dealt with as and when needed. So often if something becomes a top 10 risk and needs to be communicated to a wider audience like elected members, then it would possibly be communicated via email, etc. outside of the Risk Insurance Committee. The Risk and Insurance Committee, as you're aware, meets quarterly, and to hang risk into a 3-month period would be no good for our organisation.
Thank you, Rob. Just to comment on what does appear in the agenda today. So in the public agenda, I believe we've included the top 10 risks, and that's to give the public a feeling or a sense of where those key risks are and how we're managing them. Later on in committee, we will be looking at the full risk register, and that's just because there is some and the reason that's in committee is that there are some components of that which are not appropriate to discuss in public. So that just to explain that. In terms of Member Jenny's comment about the consistency of language, I think that's something we can certainly look to put on the to-do list in terms of refining the framework. Member Jenny, did you have further questions?
One last one, thank you, Chair. Probably for Jacinta. In the page 48 of the agenda, it talks about catastrophic level consequence being a loss of $10 million, and that felt a bit low. So I'm interested in thoughts on that and whether there maybe needs to be a little bit of a review across that, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's a good question, and in fairness, I had, in absence of there being a workshop with the council to assess that level together, previously that level had been at 1.5 to 2 million in the previous, so I at least made some work to shift that upwards a little bit, but I didn't want to go further without the conversation of council. But absolutely you're right, I think there is some need for that to be revised with the council.
Member Jenny, just out of interest, did you sort of identify a figure where you thought that that should sit, just to put that into the mix, I guess?
Well, it really is a judgment call, and you need to have a look at the specifics of your circumstances. So I don't know, there's no right or wrong answer. I'd say it's probably double that, just as at least, would be my indication from other councils I've seen.
Thank you for that. Did you say you had one further question, or?
I've got a couple of questions on the actual risk register. Do you want to do that later after we've done the framework?
Yes, like if you're happy to. So that's on the top 10 risks. Yeah, look, I think we might. Actually, no, we'll take that now. I think if we.
Thank you. So there's one of the top risks is Three Waters reform, and I think it's particularly challenging the tight timelines and all the work that's happening currently with National Transition Unit and due diligence requirements and so on. So interested in just sort of latest updates on this risk assessment. There was also Standard & Poor's report that came out yesterday, which had a comparison of councils from a financial risk perspective. So just wondering if you can give us a bit of an update. And I'm also wondering about the forward work program for this committee, whether this really tricky aspect that's got to manage through, whether there should maybe be more detailed reporting coming through to the committee just from that risk lens, given the complexity and pace of that change that's hitting the council.
So what I'll do is I'll get Jacinta, if you're happy to answer the first question, and in relation to the second piece around the work program, what I'll do is we'll park that, if that's okay, until item 6.4. I think that we can have that discussion under that item if you're happy with that. Jacinta?
So I guess in relation, just wanted to touch on the question around Standard & Poor's, because I know that's something that did come out yesterday in the public arena. What Standard & Poor's were doing was they were doing an assessment across New Zealand on the impact of Three Waters reform on council's financial position. So and we'll send it around to elected members so you can see it. When you open that up and you look at us, we're specifically mentioned along with Whangarei in terms of being negatively impacted in terms of Three Waters reform. So just to give you a bit of context in terms of what that means and where it comes from, this council, when we set our last financial strategy as part of the long-term plan, we had been in a position that for a long period of time we had not been fully funding the cost of asset replacement or not fully funding depreciation. That what that means from a water's perspective is we had operating deficits. So we were not receiving in rates the level of money that we needed to make sure that we were covering the cost of depreciation. When we set the long-term plan, though, in good financial management decision making, the council made a decision to move to fully funding the depreciation by year 4 or 5 in the long-term plan. And then going forward, we effectively started and made a decision to fund more than the level of depreciation to effectively rates fund some of that loan repayment. So effectively, that means catching up for the years that we hadn't paid for it before. Because then that means that the water activities then are in a surplus position. If we take that out of the equation, it looks like we're quite a bit worse off. So because we no longer have those surpluses that were happening in the water space to reduce the water debt. So while it when you look at it in the report, it doesn't sound quite as favorable. That I just wanted to give everyone the assurance of what that means from the decision making that we made in terms of a financial strategy. Just in terms of the three waters, we're going to cover the rest of the conversation as part of the next bit. Otherwise, it might be a good chance to pass over to Monique and David to discuss the broader three waters risk, particularly around audits that we're having in relation to the LTP amendment and other three waters in terms of the work program.
Yeah, look, I think I made a bad call by saying we'll talk about the risks now. I think if we could just pause on that for a moment, we'll cover off any further member questions around the framework and the strategy, and then I think if there's some more specific questions around the risks, we'll have that as sort of a part B if members are comfortable with that. Councillor Proctor.
No, I had a specific question on the three waters as well, so we'll come back to that. That's okay.
Thank you. Councillor Tukapua, you had a series of questions that you wanted to ask?
Yeah, it goes back to, thank you, the risk appetite. Risk appetite. Now, I hear your point about it's a new table, 5 months in, and perhaps we need a bit more time before you give us a crack at it, I guess. However, Appendix G, page 54, that risk appetite statement is from 2020, and we're now, not far away from the 23-24 year, and I think it does need to have a bit of works from us sooner rather than later. So I don't know. I caution endorsing that at this meeting, and I'll just read a couple of things from page 37, 38, and 39. I guess where I'm coming from, and that is that the risk appetite influences the distribution of resources, and furthermore some of the characteristics around how that defines, the appetite defines our attitude towards risk. And I think bullet point 7 on page 38, it's obviously speaks of, and so does the work plan, how often it's meant to be reviewed, and it's already 3 years old. But then the role and responsibility of elected members on page 39, we are responsible for setting it in conjunction with management. And this committee has a different role following on from that. So I guess I can't see anywhere, but you've admitted that, you thought maybe not, that we wouldn't get a crack. So I just want to understand how soon could it be?
Councillor Tukapua, if you could just...
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Tukapua. I agree. It can be done whenever you feel that you're ready, you have the appetite, so to speak. And so we just felt collectively that it was more of a timing thing with the new council and with the competing priorities at the moment. So, however, we have an awareness induction on the 15th for elected members of March. And so from a risk appetite perspective, we can program that in whenever the committee or the elected members want.
Yeah, just to add to Rob, as much as we say, there's a new council and we might say, look, we can do it in 6 months' time. We definitely take guidance and advice from you around when you want to do this. So if it's something you want to do, and when I say you're elected members, because it's an elected member decision, not just a risk and assurance committee decision, we can program that in as soon as you like.
From a risk management perspective, and again going back to Jenny's question around the appetite, for me as the risk manager, the sooner we get the risk appetite completed, the better.
Final question within this item is that risk register, the top 10, and obviously there's 2 significant, 8 moderate, and I know that there's the full version later on, but that whole point of risk significance, I know it's around likelihood, potential consequences, things like that, but we have a significance policy, which I guess once we set the policy, hasn't been reviewed recently, but we're guided by how much, I guess, how important it is, how much something matters, whether people care about it or not, and how does perhaps this risk, those levels versus our significance policy, how do those align, if they align at all, and could they, if they don't?
May I just make one comment through you, Mr. Chair, is around, absolutely in terms of the financial one, for example, our current significance policy isn't as prescriptive as it could be around specific levels of significance from a financial perspective, but I would absolutely see that when we consult on it as part of the long-term plan, for the next long-term plan, that we would bring that into the significance policy so that they would be linked absolutely in terms of significance. So that significance policy has to go alongside our assessment of risk.
Councillor Tupper, just to check in, are you looking for that significance aspect to perhaps be incorporated expressly into the framework and strategy, or are you looking for potentially more practically changes in how we're reporting around that in terms of full council reports and papers? Do you have a view around that?
I don't have a set view per se, but I just think that the alignment of the policy and risk and how, I'm not saying who it goes to necessarily, but yeah, because you asking whether it's for full council or this committee, I'm interested in just how they align and the value of it.
CEO Monique, did you want to add anything here?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Councillor Tukapua, what I'm hearing from you is, as part of our continuous improvement journey, a real need to make sure that not only when we're setting policy, we're looking at the relationship between policy, but when we're reporting to council and we know that we've got work to do to improve the way that we analyse risk when we bring a decision-making report to a committee or council, but that we're showing the linkage between that and the significance and engagement policy. Because to your point, we might say something is significant in terms of risk, but under the significance and engagement policy, it might not even get a look in. Yeah, I can already kind of think of a visual in my head that might show the relationship. And when you're seeing a red and a red, so when you're seeing a red for risk and a red for significance, then you know that we should probably already have done something a little while ago. versus something is red for risk, but in terms of the significance and engagement policy, it might be, we might not consider it significant, or we might be okay with it, then that would look different. So that, I think that's an action that we can probably take, Mr. Chair, in terms of thinking about how we can articulate the relationship between those two policies that kind of contradict each other at times, and think about that until we get to a point in time where they play in the sandpit together, how can we help elected members assess the relationship between those two assessments?
Thanks. Thank you, Monique. Councillor Tukapu, did you have any follow-up to that? Member Sarah, did you have any questions in relation to the framework strategy?
Yeah, so first of all, just to echo others' comments, I think it's a good work in progress. I think it goes a long way to where you're trying to get to. So well done on that. Risk appetite, actually, I hate that word. Risk tolerance, I always think of. Doesn't necessarily also have to be the one value for every single item that you might want to consider. Sometimes it's very difficult to put a value on something that could be quite catastrophic. Loss of life, how do you put a value on that sort of thing as well? It might be a percentage of our overarching revenue, something like that. But I think if you do your historical work that you mentioned, looking at some of these incidents in the past, you might get to where you need to be. Just on a procedural matter, I'm always up for a good assessment on anything, and I notice that staff, when they're required to do an assessment on any risk in any particular area, and managers seem to do it on their own, albeit with their manager's sign-off. One thing that might be to consider is you've got different topics that they have to look at, things like financial, legislative, etc., service delivery, is to have people in those particular departments sign off on the risk assessment that's done. It's just a 4-eye check done by somebody else, just to have a look at whether or not that staff member has got the gist of what needs to be done, and gives each of those areas an idea of what else is going on in the organisation that they need to be aware of as well.
Thank you, Member Sarah. Ashley, Rob, did you want to respond to that, or did you have any comments on that?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and I think that's a wonderful suggestion around linking it to another party or set of eyes that can provide oversight to the sign-off.
Mayor Burney.
Thank you, Chair. Sam. Thanks, Rob. Look, it's great to see this work progressing. The comment that you make around maturity of risk assessment is, I know we're just starting that journey. We've got a long way to go, but it's really great to see that we have done that. The report is great. For me, there's a couple of things around the, if you like, as Jenny mentioned, just tidying up some of the things in there. And for me, it's around consistency of language in terms of we're talking several times about how this will be reviewed and looked at all the time. In one space we talk 2 years, other times we say periodically, other times we say constantly. So just understanding, it's a moving beast, obviously, and we need to make sure that we are reviewing all the time. And the other one for me was around understanding the role that governance plays with management in terms of what we have to do. There are some parts of that says that staff will do stuff, and there are other times that where governance will do stuff. But it's just understanding, I suppose, and being consistent around how we understand the role that we play in ensuring that we are doing that. I am looking forward to how risk, the reporting, if you like, in terms of our future capital works and other bits and pieces that, and I'll talk about the spelling mistakes and some of the other things offline for you later on. All right, cheers.
Thank you, Mayor Wandin. I spotted a couple of those before I come in today. And all of the above really around the consistency and regularity, but however I appreciate the language comment from both the independent and the mayor. And I guess that's been a bit of a learning curve for me coming into local government.
Look, just are there any further questions for staff around the framework and the strategy before I'm going to seek some advice from the CEO? Any questions? No. So look, Monique, I guess I'm looking for some advice here around how we propose to deal with two issues. First is around perhaps the risk appetite workshop and the timing of those, and also the I guess in terms of the process, in terms of the enhancements and refinements that members have talked about in terms of the framework and the strategy. Did you have? We've obviously got a substantive resolution that recommended resolution that I'll put shortly around endorsing the framework, but there may need to be some qualification to that around what the process looks like between now and before it potentially goes to council.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd probably make a comment initially that the feedback around the timeliness of the risk appetite or risk tolerance statement and the desire to kind of get there first before we adopted the risks framework, that was echoed when this piece of work came to the executive leadership team, and I think that was because we all kind of naturally saw the risk tolerance or appetite statement as the first step. But what I heard from officers when they presented to the leadership team was the importance of kind of recognising that this is a journey, and that what the risk framework does is kind of takes us through a process of getting there. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I'm not sure whether we articulated that this afternoon. In terms of kind of where to from here, I think it would be helpful if the committee, like we've had some great feedback today, there's clearly some work to do on the framework. I think ideally the committee endorse, acknowledging that there is work to do, and that what would be helpful is if the committee could make a decision on whether they want this to come back to the committee before we formally take it to council, or whether the use of informal workshops, which would incorporate all elected members and our independent members, to workshop both the framework and what we could do as a piece of work to see how we could almost speed up the risk appetite statement process, so that when council were looking to finally adopt the risk framework, it was parallel to the risk appetite statement.
Thank you, Monique. Based on your advice and feedback there, I'm happy to indicate my comfort in terms of the informal process using that workshops and involving our members and independent members. But just does anyone have an allergic reaction to that around the table? If you could give me a sort of a shake of the head or a thumbs up if you're comfortable with that approach. Excellent, thank you. All right, Grayson's just going to make a loud noise to bring the screen down, so we just might pause for 10 seconds. It's quite slow, so I'll keep going. What I'm going to propose to do now is I'll just ask Ashley and Rob if you just don't remain at the table. But what I might do is I might move 2.3 or a slightly amended with some slightly amended wording there, and then we'll come back and I'll invite some questions around the risks, and we'll talk about Three Waters if you're happy with that. So, yes, if I could then move 2.3, which I think will read, the Risk and Assurance Committee endorse the Risk Management Framework, Strategy and Work Plan and providing a key part in leading the risk management architecture and culture within the organisation, subject to further engagement as discussed. Can I have a seconder for that? Are people happy with the specificity of that? Or would you like some more?
Can I, sorry to jump in, it just suggests that it's actually currently draft. So should we put the draft framework?
Yes, thank you, Member Sarah. So that would then read: the Risk and Assurance Committee endorsed the draft risk management framework, strategy and work plan, in providing a key part in leading the risk management architecture and culture within the organisation, subject to further. CEO Monique's got some better wording for me.
No, Mr. Chair, I was just going to make a suggestion, which I'm sure you're about to get to, which was just to kind of hearing the spirit of the discussion this afternoon. I think what I've heard as a key part of the focus was around engagement with all elected members. And so I think it would be helpful if the resolution just specified that, particularly given what Councillor Tukapoa has raised. So whether subject to further engagement with the committee and all other elected members, then it captures both elected members and our independent members.
Thank you. Grayson, are you able to have you captured that for me? Excellent. So that there will read 2.3, the Risk and Assurance Committee endorse the draft risk management framework, strategy and work plan, and providing a key part in leading the risk management architecture and culture within the organisation, subject to further engagement with the committee and all other elected members as discussed. Can I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Young. Is there any discussion or debate around that? All right, all in favour? Any against? Excellent, thank you. So now what we'll do is we'll come back to the discussion around the top 10 risks, and I understand that members had some questions about those risks, and also there's a need for a broader discussion around the three waters. What I might do is I'll invite Jacinta or Monique to provide some commentary first around the three waters piece, and then I'll invite questions around the broader risks flagged.
So it's fair to say that obviously Three Waters is a moving feast, kind of on an hourly, if not daily basis at the moment. And while it would be easy as an organisation for us to kind of get consumed by that, we can't. Our focus has to be on the legislation in front of us right now, the transition guidelines in front of us right now, but staying awake to the possibilities. And so in terms of how we're mitigating the risk at the moment, we obviously have a Three Waters transition manager. We have an internal project team which are meeting fortnightly, a fairly robust work program that has a lot of demands on the organisation. And for the independent members' benefit, just to highlight that as part of the governance structure this year, Mayor Burney has established 4 task forces, and one of those task forces is a Three Waters transition and planning task force. That task force meets for the first time in a couple of weeks, and so that will be where maybe in time some of that detailed reporting that was alluded to, that, you know, obviously as the Chief Executive I'm getting, we could lift that to a governance level and look at whether how that's reported to both the task force or the Risk and Assurance Committee. In terms of kind of the highest risk at the moment for us associated with Three Waters reform is the current legislation, which means that we are facing an adverse opinion by doing our long-term plan amendment, because the legislation, Clause 27, Schedule 1AA of the Local Government Act, unintentionally captured long-term plan amendments. It meant to capture 2024 long-term plans, but it has caught long-term plan amendments, and so elected members have obviously been well briefed on this matter. We've been working hard to try and find a way where we could avoid an adverse opinion by working through the OAG and auditors. But the legislation is the legislation, and OAG and audit must interpret the legislation of the day, even if the government of the day didn't intend for that to be interpreted in that way. The only glimmer of hope is that we are anticipating some announcements in the next couple of weeks around legislative change to provide relief to those councils who have been most impacted by the recent weather events. And we understand that that legislative change might resolve the issue that we have in front of us, but the timeliness of that legislative change is very unlikely to meet our timeframes of an adoption of a draft long-term plan by the 15th of March, recognising, of course, we have audit in process right now. We have sought independent legal advice, and this legal advice will be provided to Council on the 15th of March when they consider the adoption of the draft long-term plan amendment around the, well, we're going to have an adverse opinion, so what? And the so what is, there's obviously some pride and reputational risk there because we didn't want this, and this is not what we, this is not of our own doing. But the biggest concern from that legal advice is that I won't be in a position to sign what's called a certificate of compliance required annually under the Local Government Act. The only risk associated with that that we were made aware of was some potential implications around lending. We have made contact with Local Government Funding Agency and in conversations with Standard & Poor's, and we understand that that risk is very low, but we're continuing to highlight that risk to government as part of our broader advocacy on helping them solve the challenge of the day.
Thank you, Monique. I'll go to Councillor Proctor. I think you had some questions.
Yeah, you've answered most of the questions, but I suppose the first part of it comes back to the earlier discussion, is that probably better clarity around how you calculate these scores or identify the top 10 is probably needed. It seems, if we assessed the risk for Three Waters against, I think it's Appendix F in the previous report on the consequence and impact examples, a lot of the things we're dealing with in Three Waters would be considered catastrophic. But the catastrophic nature of it is due to the uncertainty and the lack of clarity we have around the process. And so shouldn't that raise it up to at least a red? I think that the uncertainties that we're dealing with, or the known unknowns that we're dealing with in this space, needs to elevate something like Three Waters up that top 10. But again, it comes back to us having a better understanding of how these are scored and how they're then rated. So not really a question, more of a comment.
Appreciate it, and I think that this committee will find its feet in terms of how we use this as an opportunity, perhaps test that and ask some questions around that, and to seek that assurance that the scoring is robust. So I thank you for raising that comment. Did anyone else have any further questions about Three Waters or any of the other risks that are captured there in the report? Member Sarah, just checking.
Yeah, yes, I do actually, and actually that Three Waters one, just as the way it's written on the risk register, it's not clear to me what sort of mitigations we've actually got in place to reduce the inherent impact on this. I understand from the CEO and what she said that lending is the biggest impact, and discussions with the lending agency have suggested we wouldn't be adversely impacted. But I'm just not sure what else there is that we can do to mitigate this risk, to bring it down from a 12 to a 9, just by way of an example. And I don't want to go through every single one, otherwise we could be here for quite some time. But I just think that maybe some of the mitigations need to be clarified a little bit more, particularly for us to get an understanding of when we might expect to see some of them closed off or some of them completed, so that we can get some comfort around that reduction from the inherent to the residual risks.
Monique?
Yeah, thank you, Member Sarah. Look, I think that's really valid feedback, and I think using your language, Councillor Jennings, on the committee will find its feet. This is part of also about the organisation finding its feet around how we talk about risk, how we describe risk, and how we articulate what we're doing. In terms of the specific question around, what could we actually do to reduce the risk around the adverse opinion of the long-term plan amendment? My advice is we're probably doing all we can, which is giving ourselves assurance through legal advice, conversations with OAG and with audit, to satisfy ourselves that there's not something we're missing or there's not an additional option available to us. But I think acknowledging that the risk we're most concerned about here is reputation, and it is intrinsically linked to our highest scored risk being the landfill. Because a lot of what I'm nervous about is having an adverse opinion associated with a long-term plan amendment, associated with a consultation item that this council had previously talked to our community about, and then in September last year I gave you advice that said your consultation process was unlawful. How I can satisfy all of us that we're going to follow a lawful consultation process that doesn't undermine the reputation of this organisation that we're trying to grow. And so that's when I think our tone, the leadership position we take around transparency with our community going into the long-term plan amendment, and not trying to hide that this is an adverse opinion, but actually being really upfront. Some language I've been using in the organisation the last couple of days is that, and I don't actually mean this, but I'm just going to say this to make a point, but kind of getting t-shirts printed or getting badges made about adverse opinion, because I think we've got to tell the story to our community that this is not our doing. This is a drafting error in a piece of legislation that has caught up a council that is actually trying to do the right thing by resolving some intergenerational legacy issues for our community. And I don't think we should be afraid in telling that story to our community.
I completely agree with you. And that is, I think, probably the last little sentence that you've got is your mitigation. So I think maybe that's the one that needs to be drawn out a little bit more, because that's what takes it more from, there's nothing you're going to do at the moment that's going to stop that adverse opinion. So I agree with you. I think it is that reputational, and I think it is the impact it's going to have on the community and their thoughts. Reputational, I'm repeating myself. So I think you just probably need to flesh out that work comms. I think it's more than that, and it's not just work, it's the community. Yeah, to inform that community.
Thank you, Monique and Member Sarah. It would seem that probably the best mitigation would be avoid all lawyers and politicians, but it's probably not appropriate to include. Just one, unless, Mayor Burney, you had a question on 3 points?
I was just going to say, since you're both even under more risk, in terms of these top 10 risks that we've got, when is the conversation going to be had about whether this table agrees with those top 10? Because I see we're going to talk about the rest of the list later on, but for me there's one or two that maybe should be elevated into that top 10 rather than sort of sitting where they are. And I just wondered, I suppose, how did you come to the top 10 list yourselves, and where do we go from here?
And I guess that when it comes to risk management, it can be very subjective. But from a quantitative perspective, one of the reasons I like ProMap so much from a measuring risk is that it balances likelihood and consequence with the control treatment, whereas a lot of software doesn't do that. So really at the end of the day, I think that comes back to an initial question around where the committee feels that those risks sit, because we can apply that scoring or that approach that we've talked about as managers a little bit differently to how you're applying it. So I think when we get down to the discussion of those risks, we may see some changes.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Mayor Burney. I think this is one of the things that we're going to have to navigate as a committee is in terms of further reporting of these top risks. How do we want to then use it? I think the intention is that we will deep dive into some of those risks just to ensure that we are testing the application of the framework and the scoring matrices and those kind of things. But we will have a broader conversation around the risks in terms of the risk register in committee today, and I think that's probably the useful starting point for us. One of the risks I just wanted to invite either Jacinta or perhaps Monique to speak briefly to was in first base or joint for first base is the Foxton trolley lines, because that was obviously an item that was featured in item 6.1 Health and Safety Report. And I just wondered if you wanted to take a moment to provide an update. Oh, sorry, Daniel.
Without going into all the background, but I will summarise that the Foxton tram lines have been disestablished for some time in terms of their usage, so they don't have power running through them, but they're a network of cables that were installed in the late 80s with some second-hand poles and materials that were probably fit for the era, but time certainly has moved on, and as those materials have degraded, we've witnessed a number of issues over an extended period of the last 5 years where council has had to act and install poles to replace ones that have degraded within the road reserve, and we've been through a process and negotiated with the owners, but that led sort of over the last 12 to 18 months into a proceedings where we had to go through a court process to initiate council's powers under the Roading Powers Act to actually have the poles removed. So the ruling was made in the district court last year for those poles to be removed. A directive was made in a 3-month duration. That hasn't been complied with. The latest proceedings is looking to go back to another session of the district court this Friday. But effectively the ruling of the court said they are dangerous and will become increasingly dangerous over time. They need to come down. So we're in a situation where council still don't have the power to do that. So it's back in court to try and resolve that this Friday. So that's probably all the detail I want to go into at this point. But in terms of our risk management, we are in a continual process of inspecting. So we've engaged Electra to support us in that. Also looking, ahead of the previous weather events with high winds. We've had backup plans in place with contractors' awareness if something was to come down that we could be out there closing the road if necessary. So it's certainly not a comfortable situation to be in, but effectively we've done all we can, and we've also been working with WorkSafe since around about 2016. They've been involved. Processes once again haven't been followed there, but they're at the point of not acting in any capacity to force removal either at this point. So it's just one of those things that's playing out. We'll have more of an update following Friday.
Thanks, Daniel. It's disappointing to hear that WorkSafe aren't discharging their role in this issue for us. Councillor Grimstone, did you?
Just really a follow-on question. Time frame for resolution once we have the power to act?
We could have it down. We've got a plan around a night shift, so it could be removed within a couple of days. But we need about a week's notice to get that arranged. But just being mindful that that's not an agreement at this point. So there still is aspirations from the owners to re-establish that system, and there's a whole process that's being relitigated there at the moment. So,
thanks, Daniel.
Look, does anybody have any further questions or comments in relation to the top 10 risks now, which members are happy to sort of hold off perhaps, and we have a more broad-ranging conversation around the risk register as part of our in-committee item? Excellent. So what I'll do is I'll move on to item 6.3, which is the Local Government Funding Agency LGFA Annual Meeting 2022. This is largely a noting paper around the outcome of the LGFA 2022 AGM. I'll start off by moving 2.1 and 2.2. So that reads that report 23/37 Local Government Funding Agency Annual Meeting 2022 be received, and 2.2 that this matter or decision be recognised as not significant in terms of Section 76 of the Local Government Act 2002. Can I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Mayor Bernie. All in favour? Any against? Excellent. If I could invite Jacinta to introduce and speak to the report briefly.
Thanks, through you, Mr. Chair. So it is largely procedural. So Council is a shareholder in the Local Government Funding Agency who we borrow all of our debt from. In terms of, so we have the right to vote at the AGM. As part of that, it's a regular process that we would come to Audit and Risk Committee to seek approval or a proxy or notify you of who is going to be acting as proxy on behalf of the Council. So this paper is to inform you that both myself and Pei Shan Gan, who's the Financial Services Manager, had the proxy for that meeting, and the paper also outlines how the vote went in terms of that meeting. So nothing further to comment on at this stage.
So I think pretty straightforward, but do any members have any questions or comments? Excellent. In that case, what I might do is I'll move in block 2.3 down to 2.6. So bear with me while I read that out. It is up on the screen, I believe, Grayson. So 2.3, that the committee notes the Local Government Funding Agency annual meeting was held on 23 November 2022 in Wellington. 2.4, that the committee notes the appointment of Monique Davidson, Chief Executive Officer, as the shareholder representative for Horowhenua District Council at the annual meeting. 2.5, that the committee note the appointments of Jacinta Straker, Group Manager Organisation Performance, and Pei Shan Gan, Financial Services Manager, as Council's proxy in her place. And finally, 2.6, that the committee notes the proxy or alternative voted in favour of the following proposals, which require ordinary shareholder resolutions. Anthony Quirk was re-elected to the Local Government Funding Agency's board as an independent director. Helen Robinson was elected to the Local Government Funding Agency's board as an independent director. Bay of Plenty Regional Council was re-elected to the Shareholders' Council, and Hamilton City Council was re-elected to the Shareholders' Council. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Olsen. Any discussion or debate? I don't imagine so. All in favour? Any against? No, thank you very much. We will now move on to item 6.4, which is our Risk and Assurance Committee Resolutions and Action Monitoring Report. This is an important report that keeps track of our audit recommendation, resolution and other actions. I'll start off by moving 2.1 and 2.2. That report 23/99 Risk and Assurance Committee Resolutions and Action Monitoring Report be received. And 2.2, that this matter or decision be recognised as not significant in terms of Section 76 of the Local Government Act 2002. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Grimstone. All in favour? Any against? Thank you. Jacinta, would you like to speak to the report?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So this report will be an ongoing monitoring report for this committee to outline anything that's happening, particularly in regard to any conversations or actions that are agreed as part of this meeting, as well as recommendations coming out of Audit New Zealand and the monitoring report as part of their annual audit, as well as any internal audit comments that come through that profile. And as part of the public excluded agenda, there are a number of items that will come onto that as part of our regular internal audit review with GST that was recently completed. In terms of the monitoring report, and I'll just touch on some comments that came through, we are trying hard to close out this report and make it a short report as much as possible. This report has been a very long report in the past, and so there's been a considerable amount of work done to resolve issues. There are still some ongoing items that need to be closed out, particularly in the asset information and management space that's actively happening, but is not there yet. In terms as well of legislative compliance, you'll see when we talk about the monitoring report, there is some work coming onto this committee where making sure that we're meeting our legislative compliance. Each member of our activity managers or managers will be required to sign something on a quarterly basis to say that they're meeting all their legislative requirements. That will come to this committee in terms of a report so that you've got that oversight in terms of what's happening there as well. The detailed policy work that was recommended by audit as part of the last audit as well has been completed. So there's a little bit to wrap up still, but just note that there is a big push towards getting that done as quickly as we can.
Thank you, Jacinta. So what I'm proposing to do here is we'll take this in two parts, where I just invite initially just a conversation to gauge members' comfort level around the level of reporting and whether there's enough detail in there, and that's what you're expecting to see going forward. And then if members could raise any questions about any specific items that are on the monitoring report, I'd appreciate that. Does anyone have any views around whether you're comfortable and happy with what you're seeing in terms of the contents of the monitoring report? Member Jenny.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, a really good comprehensive reporting. I suppose just some brief high-level comments. Obviously, massive long list of audit issues to deal with, and as Jacinta says, you can see that the team have been working really hard and making good progress. I think at a high level, when I looked at this and it was all blue and green, I thought, cool, everything's going to be closed off by the auditors when we get their next report, and we know that no way is that going to happen. So I think just maybe officers can have a think about how this reporting is presented, and be a bit clearer about what's still going to be on that management letter, and so that this committee is not surprised when there's still a whole lot of items still sitting in there and they're in progress. So, and maybe also just thinking about how we can go to more of an exception-based reporting, the items that are closed and resolved and done, move them off, and let's just really focus our energy on the ones that are still in progress, and particularly the ones that are higher risk or more, maybe assessed as a bit more necessary or beneficial, etc.
Thank you, Member Jenny, for that feedback. I think that's really useful. Did you have any comment or response to that?
No, it's a good point, and more than happy with that. And I acknowledge your comment in terms of the in progress and completed, because that in progress area can be quite a broad area. So we could be more specific. While there's audit sort of categories, we could be more specific so that there's more clarity about when there will be resolution. Yeah.
Jacinta, are you happy to take that as an action for obviously our next report, and perhaps you can talk to us at the next report about what you've done to reflect that feedback? Thank you.
If I could just cut in there, and sorry, Jenny, if I've jumped in, you might have something else to say, but just on the points of actually showing only those which are having continuing work done on them, I still think it's useful to show those to the committee that have been closed off, so that we can get comfort that it has been done and to the right level, as I'm sure it would be. Just on some of those that do remain open as well, you've got quite a bit in some of those to actually look at, and you've got one due by date on them for ongoing work, and think about maybe just chunking some of those step by the steps down, so that we can actually see that there's been progress made towards the completion of that entire action.
Thank you, Member Sarah. Yes, so look, Jacinta, I can see Jacinta writing notes on that, and so I think that again that will be added to some actions to reflect on. Thank you. Did members have any further comment about the style or content of the report? All right, if we could then move to any particular questions you have about any particular items in the monitoring report. Any comments, questions? Well, that looks like that's pretty easy then.
What I'll do then is I'll move 2.3 that the Risk and Assurance Committee notes the Risk and Assurance Committee resolution and actions and monitoring report. May I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Young. All in favour? Oh, sorry. Any discussion or debate? None. All in favour? Any against? No. Thank you. We could move then to item 6.5, which is the Risk and Assurance Committee Work Programme. And this is potentially the most exciting report of the day because it's essentially our to-do list and our forward-looking work programme of what this committee is expected to see and consider. And so I just wanted to flag that staff have prepared the draft work programme with input from the CEO, with the Mayor, the Chair and the Deputy Chair of this committee. And it also takes into account the handover report from our independent members in the last triennium. But obviously this is the opportunity for this committee to really drill into that and ask any questions you have around why things might feature there. So the objective is obviously to invite you to test and discuss and potentially we can discuss anything, any changes or things you'd like to see, acknowledging that this work program will be a living thing and may change over time as priorities may arise. So what I'll do is I'll start by moving 2.1 and 2.2, that report 23/99 risk and assurance. Oh, sorry, wrong one. So 2.1, that report 23/96 Risk and Assurance Committee Work Programme be received, and 2.2, that this matter or decision be recognised as not significant in terms of Section 76 of the Local Government Act 2002. I have a seconder. Councillor Allen, thank you. Councillor Young, sorry, thank you. All in favour? Any against? No, thank you. Jacinta, if I could ask you to perhaps introduce the work programme and just provide an overview. And I think there was, if you could specifically talk about the two items shown in blue italics and also the internal audit programme. Thank you.
Sure, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. So this is intended, as Councillor Jennings mentioned, to look at the program for this committee and make sure that we are, as part of our planning and work within the team, addressing all the key areas that you would like to make sure are covered and discussed as part of your role on the committee. So I'll quickly talk through the key elements. So from a Treasury perspective, you won't have seen it today, but on an ongoing basis, we have Bancorp for our Treasury advisors. So we'll be including a report that they do on our behalf in terms of where we sit from a Treasury perspective and making sure specifically that we're meeting all of the legislative or the requirements, both from a legislative policy perspective in our Treasury policy and also meeting of all of our compliance from a financial strategy and LGFA perspective. We've talked through and looked at what the monitoring report will look like, and I mentioned earlier that will also include the results of our PwC tax internal audit and any further internal audit work that we do as well on behalf of the committee. In terms of the legislative compliance one, I've talked about what that looks like as well. Sensitive expenditure, we actually, and there's no point pretending, in this one we haven't actually drafted exactly what this is going to look like from a best practice perspective yet, but it is important for things, certain credit card expenditure, expenditure of the Mayor, expenditure of the city. There are certain areas of expenditure that regularly get scrutiny from audit, and so we felt that it was important that this committee also has some oversight in terms of what that looks like. So that template expenditure, the template of what that looks like will come to you, but it's not fully in its fully formed state yet. One of the key elements from a risk perspective that we manage as a council is insurance. The level of insurance we have, who we're insured by, which assets we choose to insure or not, and how that landscape is changing, particularly given some of the weather events, that view in terms of the risks we face in getting insurance and the cost of it continues to be more difficult. And so we are doing some work at the moment in this space and we'll come to the committee with a detailed plan in terms of our strategy and plan in that space, both to make sure we've got good asset data to provide to our insurers around risks and how we're mitigating them, and also in terms of how we're managing what we insure and the costs around that. So that's what that insurance strategy and plan looks like. The tax one as well will be a bit of a view. We regularly use PwC to assist us in terms of tax advice, but also internal audit work around tax because they are experts in that space. So we plan that regularly they would come to this committee and give you an overview of how we're working with them, risks out there in the sector, and what they're seeing in terms of issues and any issues coming from the IRD as well. Regular reports as well. In terms of insurance, it's important to mention as well Aon, who are a broker on our behalf. It's important that this committee, I think, as well, has some conversation. You have the opportunity to have a presentation from them on an annual basis, so they can talk to you as well about what's happening, both nationally, internationally, and what's facing us in the insurance space. As well, from an audit perspective, we would see that, and this is a conversation that this committee would have the chance to decide on. From an Audit New Zealand perspective, we have a new audit director, Clint Ramu. He would be able and available to come to this committee at whatever intervals would work for this committee, for you to have the opportunity to seek assurance on how council is performing. At some committees I've seen, those you have the opportunity to meet with that audit director without staff present if you'd like to get any oversight or have any conversation about how the council is doing. So we can have a future conversation about what that looks like as well. And also any conversations around our management letter, regular reviews of what Audit New Zealand is planning to do, we would bring to this committee as well. Currently, we are facing some challenges with, and have been for a couple of years, with resourcing of Audit New Zealand. They just arrived on Monday for the review of the 21-22 annual report, which is quite difficult to manage. And so they're here doing the LTP, elements of the LTP and the annual report as well. We have pushed Audit New Zealand and also the OAG to try and either get timing that's better or to look to have another provider, and that's something we've actively worked on, both with the CEO and with the mayor, to try and push our chances at trying to get some resolution there, and we'll continue to do so. So I think that regular conversation with Audit New Zealand will be really useful. We've talked about risk management, I think, and that program outlines some of the conversations that we've had today and also in the health and safety space. One thing we haven't talked about specifically is probably the internal audit work program. So as a council, we have approximately $60,000, $50,000 to $60,000 as a budget for internal audit work. So in the last couple of years, that funding has largely been eaten up by, we've done some procurement internal audit. We've done a PAYE review with PwC last year. And this year, the funding is focused on looking at GST. So that it isn't a big budget and it can get eaten up quite quickly. But we felt that it was important in conversations with the chair and deputy chair this year, is that it's important that for the next meeting, we have some agreement from this committee about what you would like us to look at or any areas you'd like us to focus on in terms of the draft internal audit work program for the next financial year. So to get in nice and early and give this committee the chance to have a say in terms of what we do.
Thank you, Jacinta. And so just sorry on that final point about the internal audit program, the intention is to bring a report to the next meeting, and it may be that we have some discussion, or there may be some emails that come out between then to invite some of that early thinking so that can be reflected in the report. Before I open the floor to just general questions, could I just get a sort of indication about any interest around inviting the auditor along, either to one of our scheduled meetings or perhaps appetite for a meeting, at some other time. Does anyone have any views or initial thoughts around that?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, a critical part of our governance role is making sure that we are all over those audit issues, and also to challenge them around the process and the timeliness of their involvement with the organisation as well.
What's that? Yeah, so Jacinta just suggested that we may, it might be a good idea to schedule that as part of our next meeting. If members come from that. Excellent. Thank you. Right, open the floor to questions in terms of the content of the work program. I'm going to start with member Sarah, just so I don't forget about you down there on Zoom. If you have to kick us off.
Sorry, it's just one area that I think probably most organisations are looking at is sort of preparedness around a cyber attack. I don't know if there's been anything done in the past and maybe therefore it's not appropriate, but I just think from a technology security perspective that might be something we should consider.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. There is some mention of it in terms of the in-committee in the management of risk, but absolutely there is some work happening and we would look to continue to bring that to this committee. It's a good point in terms of mentioning it specifically.
And I guess the only other thing is preparedness for major weather events and things like that. Something, what our plan is, or I think a lot of people couldn't anticipate what damage this latest cyclone has done. And it's whether we need, and I think as a board actually, or as a risk committee, we do need to consider whether we are placed, how well we're placed, where we have to accept that we may not be well placed, so that we can do some planning around that.
Thank you, Member Sarah. Look, I think what you're suggesting is obviously very sensible, and I think it was our intention to look at some of those, particularly the two examples you've mentioned, as part of our deep dives in that risk context. And so I think what we can do, either we can do that now, and you've already flagged those two areas, but if members have some other areas where they think that we should they have some interest in doing that deep dive, what we can do is flag that now and look to incorporate that into our work program. You'll see at the moment in the bottom of the work program, we've got some areas of deep dive sort of penciled in. That doesn't mean that those have to be the things that we do look at. So we can absolutely bring forward or prioritise other areas. So if there's interest and appetite around the table to do that, happy to take those cues. Member Jenny?
Chair, if I can suggest in that risk management line, in terms of deep dives, I suggest officers look at our top risks, those top strategic risks, whether it's capital delivery program, through audits reform, and consider how does a committee kept informed around how we're going with managing those risks and mitigations and so on. So there's kind of a regular deep dive across those key top strategic risks, so we really can be across them and help and support advice that's going through to council on those matters.
Did anyone have any further questions around
what's in the work program, or anything around wanted to express any views around what they're expecting to see or have covered in terms?
Just another comment about Audit New Zealand. I think it's really important that we're engaging as a committee with them regularly. So what I suggest is you kind of have a placeholder for each meeting where it's external audit update, and it may be LTP amendments, the audit engagement letters, all those key planning points of connection with the auditors that committees kept informed, and the auditor is basically invited to all the meetings. They've got an option to attend. They may not have specific items on the agenda, but they can certainly attend, and we can ask questions and have some conversations if needed.
Thank you very much for that suggestion. I think there's broad agreement. I can see sort of nodding around the table, so I think if we could take that as an action. Final opportunity on any comments or views on the work program.
Just one more from me, sorry. Just an observation really as to whether or not it would be helpful at all if there was a subcommittee at all around getting the annual report out. I noticed from something I was reading in here about the quality and just the iterations, and I know how hard it is to go through all of that and get it right. And I just wondered whether or not how much involvement we could assist with in this committee, whether there needs to be a subcommittee to look at that in advance of it coming for the okay or the approval here.
Jacinta, did you have a view? Did you have any advice for us around that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's probably one of those things I'd never say no. Every eyes are good eyes. It's just at what level of involvement the committee members would like to have around that. Hopefully, in terms of some of the comments, I guess I'd probably note, hopefully some of those comments are historic comments that what you won't see in a management letter again in terms of level of review prior to it getting to audit. Those types of things are practices that are things of the past. But absolutely, if there is a desire, I mean, in terms of the annual report at this stage, in terms of the level of improvements and things that are happening in the team, it's still a basic annual report. We absolutely look to see it being a much more conversational piece for the community in the future. So we would love to have any insight and advice in terms of helping to guide best practice in the future, and any oversight in terms of review, happy with. But just wanted to reiterate that some of those comments are very much a thing of the past, hopefully.
Okay, I guess it's something we can look at nearer to the time, perhaps. You know, if we're kind of, if they actually get the audit done and it's a little bit late and you're under time pressures or something. But yeah, happy to help.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Member Sarah. I think if you're comfortable, we can look at that further once we're further down the track. Member Jenny.
Just a suggestion on the alternative way to do it. I think we can maybe just keep it more informal. Maybe it's just a 1 hour meeting online, catch up with officers and talk through any feedback questions we've got, so that the actual formal committee meeting goes through more efficiently and gets rubber stamped and there's no roadblocks. I suppose that's another alternative suggestion.
Yeah, look, comfortable with that suggestion, and I think that's something we can certainly put in place. Any further views? I think Councillor Grimstone, you look like you're about to press your button.
Yeah, look, I just endorse the view that I think the deep dive topics can probably be a little bit movable, and I would like to see the prioritisation around emergency readiness and slash that with environmental concerns too. So I think if that comes a little bit earlier in the work plan, that'd be good.
Thank you for that, Councillor Grimstone. I think that we can certainly shift things around, and I agree with you. I think that that's important. It's an important one to put some priority and some emphasis around. All right. Well, unless there's any further questions on or comments on the work program, what I'll do is I'll move 2.3. That the Risk and Insurance Committee notes the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee work program. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Olsen.
The word finance in there?
I believe so, but should I read it again? Oh yes, we've got a sneaky finance. Yeah. So I'll repeat that. 2.3, that the Risk and Insurance Committee notes the Audit and Risk Committee work program.
And just confirming, Councillor Olsen, you happy to second that?
Thank you. Any discussion or debate? All in favour? Any against? No, thank you. So I think that brings us to a conclusion of our open committee meeting. So I just wanted to thank everybody for their contributions. There's been significant engagement, been really positive. So now we're going to move into committee to deal with two reports, being the Risk Management Risk Register 2023 and the GST Compliance Evaluation Findings Report by PwC. Yes, so just confirming that the basis for moving into committee is Section 48(1)(a) of the Local Government and Official Information Meetings Act, relying on grounds Section 7.2a, Section 7.2fi, and Section 7.2ci. Can I have a seconder to move into public exclusion? Thank you. Councillor Proctor. All in favour? Any against? No, that's great. If we could stop the live stream and then we can proceed in committee. Oh, and just one final thing that in accordance with Standing Order 18.2, I'd like to invite those elected members who are in the room who are not members of the committee to